Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you guys back to the Boombox Guru channel. I'm your host, LB. So today, guys, I got a book review for each and every one of you. I know it's been a long time since I've done a book review, but I finally recently read and finished a book that I could talk about to you guys. So the book that I just finished is called Nothing But a Good Time: The Uncensored History of the 80s Hard Rock Explosion. That's what this book is called. A big thank you and shout out to my friend Krista, who actually let me borrow this book. This is hers. Uh, I gotta tell you, man, I'm actually kind of mad that I finished this book so quick because it was just such a good read, man. I hated that it ended. I might even, I don't know how long she's gonna allow me to keep this book, but I might read it again. That's just how good it was. But yes, this book, it is an oral history on the 1980s glam metal scene, or like some people like to say hair metal. Although I don't, I try not to use that term hair metal too much anymore. But yeah, it's about the 80s glam metal scene. All those bands such as Poison, Mötley Crüe, Warrant, all the big names that were very active and that a lot of people grew up on during the 1980s. They were all over MTV and so forth. So this book really chronicles that era from the beginning to the end, all the way to the reemergence of it that happened in the late 2000s and so forth. But the interesting thing about this book is that the way that it's structured is that it's actually the story is actually told from the people who were in that scene themselves. So you're actually getting stories, you're actually getting information and inside scoops from those actual people, from the bands to the industry insiders. I mean, you got everybody from the costume designers, the photographers, the publicists, producers, record execs, even people who ran the clubs on the Sunset Strip where a lot of these bands played and got their early grind from, as well as even a few groupies that knew some of these bands. So you get a lot of really good stories from everybody, and it's told from them themselves. This isn't one of those books where the author is telling the story and then here and there you'll get some info from this person and that person. No, the book is told from everybody. It is basically the whole narrative is controlled and is told by their perspectives. And you got so many huge names that appear in this book. From the members of Poison, Mötley Crüe, Ozzy Osbourne's in here, the members of Twisted Sister, Warrant, just so many people, famous producers like Bo Hill and Tom Werman, and a lot of the A&Rs and the record company executives who worked at labels like Atlantic and so forth, where a lot of these bands were being signed. And it's just a great book, and it's actually broken up into like 7 parts. It's broken up into 7 parts, and each part has like a certain number of like chapters. And the chapters in this book is they're really short. There's not really too many overly long chapters, man. There was a few chapters that were only like maybe 1 or 2 pages at the most, which I thought was kind of interesting, and that's probably why I was able to get through this book so fast. But it is, as you can see, it is a really thick book, so there is a lot of info on here, and it was just really cool to just get the inside scoop on a lot of these bands, to get the stories of the early years of in the early beginnings of that Sunset Strip scene. You get to hear about people meeting Van Halen and seeing those guys before they really blew up, and you get to hear about the early days of Mötley Crüe when they first started coming about. And another thing that's really cool is how it really shows how that was such a small scene, because a lot of those guys were intertwined. A lot of those guys were in other different bands, and when those bands stopped, they decided to form the iconic bands that we know. Uh, let's see, another thing that I really got from this book, man, was like determination was a big factor that I really took from this book, man, because there was a few bands in here, and you'll be surprised when you read it. Some of these are bands that are well established, iconic bands that went on to sell millions of records. A lot of people really didn't think they had a shot to make it. a lot of people said, this band sucks. There's no way they're gonna get a record deal. And lo and behold, they would get signed to a major label, and they end up selling tens of millions of records and so forth, man. And a lot of that had to do with their determination and willpower, man. Like, no matter what people said, they still stuck to their guns, and they kept doing what they were doing. And even though they may not have been the best musicians, a few of these bands, it was just something some of these bands just had that ick factor that made them stars. I think that was more another thing that I really took from it was like, it wasn't really about necessarily being the greatest and most proficient musician. It was all about having that factor, having that ick factor. Some people just have it. It doesn't really mean that they're the greatest or the best of all time, but they just have that factor that makes them kind of stand out and appeal more to people, man. Because there was a few bands in here where, a lot of people was like, man, these guys are terrible musicians. They suck. But they ended up putting out chart-topping hits. They ended up selling millions of records. And it is what it is, And then there was other bands that were, kind of that may have been better, but they didn't really get that shot. It's just, I guess it's like being at the right place at the right moment. Another thing, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's the name of the game here. That's probably no surprise to some of you guys. Like a lot of that stuff that you've seen in the videos with the women and things of that nature, a lot of that was really happening behind the scenes. But one thing that stuck out to me was that how a lot of these bands, especially the male bands, they were pulling that stuff before they were even signed. I mean, these guys were broke, and they were doing that stuff. Like, they had groupies and, being very promiscuous with all kinds of different women and stuff like that. They were doing this a lot, man. A lot of them were doing it to survive. I guess it's that hobosexual term. A lot of these guys were like, they were like charming a lot of these young women, and so they could have a place to stay and have a place to eat and things of that nature, so they wouldn't starve. They had them paying their rent and things of that nature. I'm like, dang, man, these guys had some game, man. I need to take some pointers from these dudes. What were they doing? And these guys were broke. These guys were broke, and they were doing that. What else, man? Oh yeah, and it really showed how that scene had a really huge effect on pop music as well, because there was a few major pop artists of the 1980s that actually had some interest in this scene, or they were influenced by that scene. I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but there was one major pop artist whose image changed around the late 80s. That person's image changed around the late 80s, and it was because that person saw one of those major bands from that era before that band was even signed. And that same band also got signed by another major pop artist in the 1980s. And I'll give you guys a little bit of hint. Both of these were men. They were both men. They were two of the major pop artists of the 1980s. And some would say that they may have been rivals. I just let you guys guess about that. But it was interesting. I'm not gonna say the band or whatever, but it really kind of surprised me to find out that information, how that scene had such an influence on pop culture in general. It also goes into like how, towards the tail end of that era, you had a lot of bands, how it got oversaturated and such, and it brings into question whether the grunge movement was really what killed that scene, or was put in a decline at that time. But it does have a happy ending. It kind of reemerges to where things are now, where you see a lot of these bands are out touring, and they've gotten their fan base. They're doing better than they were. They're doing better now than they were back in the day. So it kind of brings everything full circle, how these bands have reemerged, and that the appeal and the appreciation for that music never was lost. That maybe it was something that was concocted by the labels or whatever, but you see now how Mötley Crüe and Poison and all them, Guns N' Roses and so forth, are all doing these huge stadium tours and stuff now. So this scene had a lasting impact on music in general, man. But great, this was just a great read. Like I said, I wish I could have. I wish it had been a few more chapters long, had a few more parts, man, because I really enjoyed hearing the inside scoop, man, and not to mention like the early struggles of the bands, how they made it, because a lot of these bands, man, they were when they moved. Some of these guys weren't even from L.A. A lot of these bands moved out to L.A. to that Sunset Strip to get a deal and to get to be a part of that scene, and some of the struggles that a lot of them went through, it goes to show you that, man, it was one of those situations where there was nowhere else to go but up, for them. So I'm sure those circumstances they were in by moving into this new town and having to like really grind and pay their dues, I'm sure they had a lot to do to motivate them to like just keep going and not to give up. Because a lot of them was really struggling. A lot of them was really struggling. A lot of them was living in dangerous parts of LA where they could have been dead or something like that. So that was like very eye opening for me, man. But I've never had a problem with like the '80s hard rock or '80s glam metal. I've always enjoyed that music. I remember as a kid watching VH1 and seeing all the behind the music specials on a lot of these bands that are talked about in this book. So reading this book, it actually it was a bit nostalgic for me, just remembering those days as a kid, watching those behind the music specials, seeing all those videos on pop-up video and so forth. It kind of really brought back like, yeah, man, this is really good music. Who cares what the naysayers say, what the pretentious kind of so-called anti-corporate rock kind of crowd thought about this music? Who cares? There was a lot of good bands. Yes, there may have been a lot of generic bands who weren't that good, but there was a lot of great music and a lot of classic albums that came out of this era, and we see now today that it still has a lasting effect. A lot of these bands are touring now as we speak, and they're making a lot of money, and they have a loyal fan base, and they're doing their thing. A lot of them are doing better now than they were back in the day when they were younger, man. But I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed hearing from everybody, man. And another thing I liked was how the book, since this book is told from these particular individuals' perspective, man, it was really cool to kind of hear or read different situations from everybody else's perspective. Like there will be a specific topic or story being discussed in a chapter, and this person would tell it from their perspective, and then the next person would be like, yeah, I don't quite remember it that way. I remember being like this. Or somebody be like, nah, that's not right. This is how it went. I thought that was kind of interesting too. That made it for an interesting read as well, to hear all the different perspectives from everybody. And it kind of made you scratch your head like, well, I wonder who's got the correct story, man. It was very relatable in that way. So I really enjoyed that part of the book as well, man. But yeah, this is called Nothing But a Good Time, the uncensored history of the 80s hard rock explosion. I highly recommend anybody who hasn't read this book to go check it out. However you may read your books, whether you get it digitally on Kindle, or if you're like me and my friend Krista, who, as you can see, we like to read books. We like the hard copies and so forth. I highly recommend this book, man, because it is a great read. Maybe if you're not a fan of this type of music, I think it's still an interesting read, because you may even grow an appreciation for that sound. At least, even if you don't necessarily become a fan of it, it may make you look at it in a different light. And like I said, I've always enjoyed this kind of music, but it has like increased my appreciation for it, especially hearing like the grit and grind that a lot of these bands had to go through in order to make it, man. It just made me appreciate it so much more, man. Reading these stories, a lot of times it was like watching the movie, and the way that the book is structured with, you getting everybody's perspective on certain issues and topics and so forth, man. It kind of felt like I was reading the transcript to a documentary or something, man. But really great book, highly recommend it, man. Like I said, I might read this book again. That's just how good it was, and it definitely put me on a 80s glam metal kick, man. That's all I've been listening to for the past few days or week or so, man. Is a lot of that music. I've been like revisiting that music and like reintroducing myself to that stuff, man. And I don't know, it just making me appreciate that stuff so much more after reading this book, man. But I highly enjoyed this. Definitely pick this book up. I'm sure you can probably get it off of Amazon or wherever you may purchase books at. I'm sure it's available somewhere, but highly recommend this book for anybody that's a fan of 80s hard rock, 80s metal, or metal music in general. But yeah, really enjoyed this book. So that's it for this book review. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully, I can get my hands on another book of some sort that I can read and maybe do more of these book reviews a little bit more often. But with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this recent book review. If you did, if you can do me a huge favor, hit that thumbs up and give me a like, because it really does help the channel. Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button, tap that bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop new content. I want to give a huge thank you to everybody that's been showing their support, that's been watching my videos and supporting the channel. I really do appreciate that. And as always, hope everybody has a blessed day, a blessed week, and love, peace, and music. Peace out, y'all.